Five Navy SEALs sat in a quiet living room in Chesapeake, Virginia. These were men who had survived gunfire, underwater demolitions, and midnight raids across 6 countries. Nothing on earth made them flinch. Then, a 14-year-old black girl walked in. She pulled back her braids and revealed a crescent-shaped mark behind her left ear. She said,
"My dad had that mark."
Then she unfolded a piece of paper and read a name out loud. 5 Navy SEALs, warriors who never broke, froze. One of them started to cry. Why? Who was this girl? Whose name did she speak? And why did it shatter 5 of the toughest men alive? Yeah, something about that just didn't sit right. All right, let's get into the story. Norfolk, Virginia, Granby Street, a row house with peeling wallpaper and one working bathroom for 8 people. This was home for Zuri Banks, if you could call it that. She was 14 years old, black, orphaned, or so she'd been told. She lived in a group foster home run by a woman named Tanisha Odom. Tanisha was kind. She was also overwhelmed. 6 kids, 2 bedrooms, a refrigerator that hummed too loud and never kept things cold enough. Zuri was the quietest of them all. She didn't fight for the bathroom. She didn't complain about dinner. She moved through that house like a ghost, present but barely visible. The other kids learned quickly, don't bother Zuri. She won't bother you. But every night, after the lights went out, Zuri did the same thing. She reached under her pillow and pulled out 3 objects. 3 things she had carried since she was small enough to fit inside a cardboard box at Child Protective Services. The first was a photograph, faded, creased from years of folding and unfolding. It showed a woman in a Navy dress uniform standing on a pier. The woman was black. She was beautiful, and she was smiling at whoever held the camera like they were the only person alive. Zuri didn't know this woman's name. No one had ever told her, but she studied that face every single night, the curve of the jaw, the shape of the eyes, searching for herself inside a stranger. The second object was a brass coin, heavy, stamped with a trident on one side and 5 words on the other. The only easy day was yesterday. Zuri didn't know what it meant. She only knew it felt important. It felt like it belonged to someone who mattered. The third was a note, handwritten on yellowed paper, the ink nearly gone. 4 words, find Eula, she'll know. Find Eula, she'll know. Know what? Zuri had asked every foster parent, every caseworker, every adult who passed through her life. Nobody recognized the name. Nobody cared enough to look. So Zuri stopped asking. She folded the note back up. She put it under her pillow with the photograph and the coin, and she waited. For what? She didn't know. But there was one more thing about Zuri Banks, something she never showed anyone. Behind her left ear, hidden beneath her braids, was a birthmark, crescent-shaped, small, perfect, like someone had pressed a tiny moon into her skin the day she was born. The other kids at the group home had seen it once. They called it a bug bite. Zuri never corrected them. But alone, in the dark, she would trace it with her fingertip, slowly, gently, the way you touch something that hurts, but you can't stop reaching for. One night, Zuri couldn't sleep. She pulled out the photograph and held it under her phone's flashlight. She had looked at this image 1,000 times, but tonight, she saw something new. The woman stood on a pier. Behind her, a ship was docked. The hull number was partially visible, DDG 78. And below the woman's collar, barely visible, almost lost in shadow, a necklace, a small pendant shaped like a crescent moon. Zuri's hand moved to her own birthmark. Same shape, same curve. Her heart began to pound. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written 5 words, Lori and G, N-A-S, Oceana, 2011. Lori. That was a name, a real name, and G, an initial. Whoever took this picture knew both of them. Something cracked open inside Zuri's chest that night. It wasn't hope. Hope had been beaten out of her years ago. This was older, deeper. It was the feeling of a locked door discovering, for the first time, that it had a keyhole. The next morning, Zuri asked Tanisha a question she had never asked before. "Can I see my file? My real file, the one from when I was a baby?" Tanisha set down her coffee mug. She looked at Zuri for a long time. Then she said, "Baby, those records are sealed. A judge sealed them when you were little. I've tried to get them opened. They won't budge." Zuri pressed. "Which judge?" Tanisha hesitated. She glanced toward the hallway as if someone might be listening. Then she lowered her voice. "Judge Merriweather. But you didn't hear that from me." Zuri filed the name away. Judge Merriweather. She didn't know yet what that name meant. She didn't know it was the lock and the man who had swallowed the key. But she would. Because 2 days later, a stranger showed up at the group home, and he was holding a coin identical to hers. The stranger's name was Kwame Asante. 48, black, built like a man who carried heavy things his whole life. He stood on the sidewalk outside Tanisha's group home with his hands visible, the way someone approaches a wounded animal. Zuri sat on the front stoop. She watched him the way she watched everyone, with distance, with the quiet readiness of a girl who learned that strangers never brought good news. Kwame pulled a brass coin from his jacket. He held it up, identical to hers. Same trident, same 5 words. "I'm not here to scare you," he said. "That coin you dropped at Family Services belongs to a specific SEAL team. I need to know how a kid in foster care ended up carrying it." Zuri said nothing. "I served with the man who had one just like yours. His name was Gideon Hale. I haven't seen that coin since he gave it to someone he loved very much." Gideon. G. The initial on the photograph. Zuri's pulse kicked, but her face gave nothing away. Kwame's voice dropped. "Kid, if you who I think you are, people made damn sure you'd never be found. That means this is dangerous." He left his phone number on a gas station receipt. Then he walked away. Zuri didn't call him that night. She needed to find out herself first. The Norfolk Public Library opened at 9. Zuri was there at 8:47. She had skipped school. Nobody would notice. That was the thing about being invisible. You could disappear, and the world kept moving. She sat at a back corner computer, typed 4 words, Gideon Hale, Navy SEAL. Results came fast. Gideon Tobias Hale, decorated SEAL commander, Silver Star, Purple Heart, retired 2018. Founder and CEO of Hale Maritime Defense Systems. Net worth, $2.3 billion. Zuri read the number 3 times. Billionaire. She'd grown up sharing a bathroom with 5 children, wore the same sneakers for 2 years, and 20 minutes away in Virginia Beach, a man worth billions ran a company with his name on the building. She clicked a press photo. A white man in his early 50s, strong jaw, pale eyes, a face carved by discipline and grief in equal measure. And there, behind his left ear, a crescent-shaped mark. Zuri's hand moved before her mind caught up. Her fingers found her own birthmark. Same shape, same position. She printed the photo. Her hand shook so badly she tried twice to pull it from the tray. That evening she called Kwame. No greeting. "The name Eula, does it mean anything?" Long silence. Then, "Eulalia Graves, Navy nurse at Portsmouth Naval Medical Center. Give me a day, I'll find her." He added, "Be careful, Zuri. Someone spent serious money making you disappear. They won't like it coming undone." Eula Graves lived in a clapboard house in Chesapeake. Wind chimes on the porch, a Navy flag by the door. Kwame drove Zuri there Thursday afternoon. He stayed in the car. This was her moment. Zuri knocked. The door opened. Eulalia Graves, 73, silver-haired, 5'2" of quiet steel, took one look at the girl on her porch and grabbed the door frame. She didn't recognize Zuri. She'd never seen her. But she recognized Lori because Zuri, at 14, looked exactly like her mother at the same age. Same eyes, same jaw, same way of standing, straight-backed, chin up, braced. Eula whispered, "Oh, Lord. Oh, baby. You're Lorraine's girl." She pulled Zuri inside. What followed took 3 hours. Eula talked, Zuri listened, and the locked door inside her chest began to open. Lorraine Banks, Navy cryptologist, stationed at NAS Oceana, 2009. She fell in love with a SEAL named Gideon Hale. 2 years together. Real love. Eula saw it firsthand. The way Gideon looked at Lori. The way Lori laughed around him. "That man loved your mother," Eula said. "Don't let anyone tell you different." But Gideon's family was old Virginia money, defense dynasty, a family trust worth billions. And his older sister, Vivian Hale Prescott, considered a black woman a threat to everything they'd built. When Lori became pregnant, Vivian moved to destroy it. Eula walked to her bedroom. She returned with a manila envelope hidden for 14 years. Inside, Zuri's original birth certificate, the one that should have been destroyed. Mother, Lorraine Amala Banks. Father, Gideon Tobias Hale. Zuri held it in both hands. Her name. Both parents' names. For the first time in her life, proof she came from someone. But Eula wasn't finished. After you were born, Vivian hired lawyers. They fabricated drug tests, filed fake CPS complaints, got your mother deployed overseas fast. While Lori was gone, a judge named Colton Merriweather signed an emergency custody order. No hearing, no evidence, no lawyer for your mama. Eula's voice cracked. 2 men in suits came. A court order I wasn't allowed to read. They took you from my arms. You were screaming. They told your father you died. They told your mother you were adopted by a good family. Both lies. And Lori? She died 3 years later, found in her apartment, ruled accidental overdose. Your mother never touched drugs, Eula said. Not once. I believe she was getting close to the truth, and someone stopped her. Zuri sat in that kitchen holding her mother's name in one hand and her mother's death in the other. She was 14. She had just learned 3 things. Her mother loved her, her father didn't know she existed, and the people who separated them had enough power to bury the truth, and maybe to bury her mother with it. The question now wasn't whether Zuri would try to reach her father. It was who would try to stop her, and what they'd already done to make sure she stayed invisible. Yo, nah, wait. Let that sit for a second. They told this man his baby was dead. His own sister. And he believed it. 'Cause I mean, why wouldn't you? That's family. And now I'm thinking, if someone you trusted like that lied about something that big, could you ever forgive them? Like, really? Could you? Kwame Asante sat alone in his apartment that night. The television was off. The lights were low. He held his phone in one hand and stared at the photograph Zuri had shown him. The press image of Gideon Hale with the crescent mark behind his ear. He had served beside Gideon for 15 years. He knew what that birthmark looked like. He'd seen it 100 times, in barracks, on helicopters, in field hospitals. And now a 14-year-old girl in Norfolk had the same one. He picked up his phone. He called Declan Reese first. Declan answered on the second ring. Former chief warrant officer, red-haired, sharp-minded, now a practicing attorney in Richmond. Kwame didn't waste time with small talk. Gideon's daughter might be alive. Silence. Then Declan's voice, low and tight. Say that again? Kwame said it again. He told Declan everything. The coin, the photograph, the birthmark, the birth certificate Eula had kept hidden for 14 years. Declan listened without interrupting. When Kwame finished, Declan said one thing. Call the others. By midnight, all 5 men knew. Augusto Gus Padilla, senior chief, now a boat mechanic in Hampton, father of a daughter the same age as Zuri. Jonas Falk, lieutenant commander, quiet, methodical, living in Williamsburg. And Shepard Shep Calloway, master chief, 61 years old, the oldest and hardest of them all. Each man reacted differently. Gus slammed his fist on his kitchen table. Jonas asked for every detail twice. Shep said nothing for a very long time. Then his voice came through the phone like gravel. If this is true, someone is going to answer for it, and it won't be the girl. But they agreed on one thing. They could not go to Gideon yet. Gideon Hale had struggled with depression since Lori's death. He drank too much. He slept too little. He ran a billion-dollar company during the day and fell apart at night. If they told him his daughter was alive and it turned out to be wrong, it would finish him. They needed proof first. DNA. Irrefutable. But to get that, they needed access to Zuri. And to keep access to Zuri, they needed her to stay in Norfolk. They didn't know that someone was already working to make sure she didn't. 300 miles away, in the glass tower of Hale Maritime's headquarters in Virginia Beach, a phone was ringing. Vivian Hale Prescott picked it up. On the other end was Judge Colton Merriweather. His voice was thin, nervous, the voice of a man who had sold his integrity years ago and never stopped looking over his shoulder. Someone's been asking questions, Merriweather said, about the sealed records. A former SEAL named Kwame Asante visited a caseworker at Family Services. Vivian's composure cracked for exactly 1 second. Her hand tightened on the phone. Then she smoothed her voice back to silk. Handle it, the way we handled it before. Here's what you need to understand about Vivian Hale Prescott. She was not a cartoon villain. She didn't cackle. She didn't monologue. She was a 58-year-old woman who had convinced herself completely that everything she'd done was necessary. The Hale Family Trust was worth $2.3 billion. It funded defense contracts, political campaigns, and philanthropic foundations across 12 states. Vivian had managed it for 20 years. Her children, 2 sons, both in their 30s, were the expected heirs. Under the trust charter, direct bloodline descendants of the Hale family were entitled to an equal share. A biracial grandchild wasn't just embarrassing to Vivian. She was a legal heir. She was a financial threat. She was a crack in the wall that Vivian had spent her entire adult life building. So Vivian did what she always did. She made a phone call, and the machine started moving. Within 48 hours, a new caseworker arrived at Tanisha Odom's group home. His name was Mr. Denton. Gray suit, thin smile. He carried a clipboard and spoke in a voice designed to sound reasonable. Zuri Banks is being transferred, he said. Juvenile residential facility in Roanoke. Behavioral concerns. Tanisha stared at him. Behavioral concerns? That child has never been in trouble, not once. Mr. Denton smiled his thin smile. It's all in the paperwork, ma'am. But Tanisha Odom had survived her own battles with the system. She knew what a rigged transfer looked like. She knew the smell of paperwork that had been written before the reason existed. She told Denton she needed 48 hours to review the documents. He gave her 72. Then the transfer would proceed regardless. Tanisha waited until Denton's car pulled away. Then she picked up her phone and called Kwame. They're trying to move her, Tanisha said. Fast. Roanoke. 300 miles from here. Something is very wrong. Kwame hung up. He called the team. Within 2 hours, the 5 men made a decision. They needed to meet Zuri. in person, all 5 of them. They needed to see the birthmark with their own eyes. They needed to hear her story from her own mouth. If this girl was who they believed she was, they would burn down every wall between her and her father. But first, they had to look her in the face. Kwame is called Zuri. There are 4 men I served with, brothers. They knew the man on your birth certificate. They fought beside him. They watched what losing you did to him. They need to hear your story directly. Zuri was quiet for a long time. Then, where? Eula's house. Neutral ground. Somewhere you feel safe. Zuri didn't feel safe anywhere. She hadn't felt safe since she was old enough to understand what foster care meant. But Eula's kitchen, with its wind chimes and navy flag and the smell of coffee that had been sitting too long, was the closest thing she had. When? She asked. Tomorrow. We have 72 hours before they move you to Roanoke. After that, you disappear into a system where the people who buried you have even more control. Zuri closed her eyes. She thought about the birth certificate. She thought about the crescent mark. She thought about a billionaire in Virginia Beach who didn't know she was alive. I'll be there, she said. Tomorrow, 5 former Navy SEALs would sit across from a 14-year-old girl in a living room in Chesapeake. They didn't know what she was going to say. She didn't know what her words would do to them. And somewhere between Norfolk and Virginia Beach, a woman named Vivian Hale Prescott was making phone calls because the dead girl had started walking, and the grave she dug 14 years ago was no longer deep enough. Eula Graves' living room had never held this much silence. The curtains were drawn. Late afternoon light came through in thin gold lines across the carpet. 5 men sat on mismatched furniture, a couch, 2 folding chairs, a piano bench, a corner armchair. They wore civilian clothes, but they didn't sit like civilians. They sat like men who had spent decades walking into rooms where anything could happen. Declan Reese, close-cropped red hair, positioned himself nearest the door. Habit. Gus Padilla leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Jonas Falk stood by the window with his arms crossed, watching the street. Shep Calloway sat perfectly still in the corner armchair. He watched everything and said nothing. Kwame sat beside Zuri. She was on a wooden kitchen chair that Eula had carried in. Her backpack sat on her lap like a shield. Eula stood in the doorway to the hall, holding a glass of water she hadn't touched. Nobody spoke for 30 seconds. In a normal room, 30 seconds is nothing. In this room, it was long enough for every man to notice the same thing. This girl was terrified, and she was hiding it the way they'd been trained to hide fear, behind absolute stillness. Shep broke the silence. His voice was low, careful, like a man diffusing something fragile. Kwame tells us you have some things that belong to someone. Would you mind showing us? Zuri looked at Kwame. He nodded, gentle, just a dip of his chin. She unzipped her backpack. She pulled out 3 items and placed them on Eula's coffee table, one at a time. The photograph, the challenge coin, the yellowed note. 5 pairs of eyes locked onto that coin. Gus picked it up first. He turned it over in his fingers. His jaw tightened. He didn't speak. He passed it to Declan. Declan examined both sides, then looked at Kwame. A silent conversation passed between them, the kind only men who have trusted each other with their lives can have. No words, just eyes, and the message was clear. This is real. Jonas asked the first question. His voice was gentle, gentler than you'd expect from a man his size. Where did you get these? They were with me when I went into foster care, Zuri said. The lady who dropped me off left them in a bag. Tanisha kept them for me. Shep spoke again. And the note? Find Eula? I don't know who wrote it. I found Eula 2 weeks ago. Zuri glanced toward the doorway where Eula stood. She told me about my mama. The word hung in the air. Mama. These men had known a woman named Lori who would have been someone's mama. They had seen her photograph in Gideon's quarters. They had watched him hold a similar coin and press it against his forehead during nights when the grief got too heavy. Jonas pressed carefully. What else did Eula tell you? Zuri hesitated. She was deciding how much to trust. Every instinct built over 14 years of survival was screaming at her to say nothing, give nothing, protect yourself. But Kwame's hand rested on the back of her chair, steady, present, and Eula, in the doorway, gave a small nod. Zuri reached into her backpack again. She pulled out two things. The first was the printed press photograph of Gideon Hale from the library computer. She laid it on the coffee table beside the old photograph of Lori. The five men looked at both images side by side. Lori on a pier in 2011, Gideon at a defense conference in 2023. Two people who had loved each other, separated by lies and 12 years of silence. Then Zuri did something none of them expected. She turned her head to the left. Slowly, she reached up with both hands and pulled back her braids, exposing the skin behind her left ear. The crescent birthmark. Small, perfect, unmistakable. She held the position. Then, with her other hand, she pointed to the press photo of Gideon, to the place behind his ear where the same mark was visible. And she said it, quiet, clear, a voice that didn't waver. My dad had that mark. The room shifted. Not physically, something deeper, something in the air itself changed. Gus closed his eyes. Declan's hand went to his mouth. Jonas turned away from the window. Shep didn't move, but his breathing changed. And for these men, that was the equivalent of a scream. Then Zuri reached into her backpack one final time. She pulled out the birth certificate, the original, the one Eula stole from the hospital 14 years ago. She unfolded it on the table. She smoothed the creases with her palm, and she read the name. Not because they couldn't see it, but because she had waited 14 years to say it out loud, and she was going to say it. My father's name is Gideon Tobias Hale. The room didn't go quiet. It went still. The kind of still that only happens when every person in the space stops breathing at the same time. 5 Navy SEALs froze. These were men trained to function when every instinct screamed shut down. They had held steady through gunfire, midnight ambushes, underwater operations, and zero visibility. Their nervous systems had been forged to override panic, and they froze, because every single one of them knew what that name meant. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, the man. Kwame was in the staging area in Djibouti when Gideon got the phone call. His daughter was dead. Gideon dropped to his knees on the concrete floor and didn't get up for an hour. Kwame stood over him the entire time, one hand on his shoulder, saying nothing, because there was nothing to say. Shep held Gideon at 3 a.m. in a barracks in Afghanistan. Gideon was sobbing, the kind of sobbing that doesn't make sound. Shep had never heard silence that loud. Gus drove Gideon to a cemetery in Norfolk where a small headstone read, Baby Girl Hale. There was nothing in the ground beneath it. They stood there for 40 minutes. Gus watched a man say goodbye to a grave that had always been empty. Declan watched Gideon drink himself into the floor for 2 straight years. Watched him show up for missions with steady hands and dead eyes. Watched him function on the outside while something inside him rotted. Jonas was the one who talked him back from the edge. One night in a hotel room in Bahrain, when Gideon had a service pistol on the bed and nothing left to lose, Jonas sat with him until sunrise and never told the others how close it came. And now, in a living room in Chesapeake, Virginia, a 14-year-old girl with their brother's birthmark had spoken his name. The child he buried in his heart was sitting in front of them, alive, in secondhand clothes and worn-out sneakers, holding a birth certificate in hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Shep Calloway pressed his fist against his mouth. His shoulders began to shake. Master Chief, 61 years old. The man who never showed emotion. The man who once carried a wounded teammate 3 miles through hostile terrain without making a sound. He was crying. Gus stood up and walked to the window. He put both hands on the sill because his legs wouldn't hold him. Declan wept openly. No attempt to hide it. Jonas had his back turned. His hand was over his eyes. And Kwame, who found her, who started all of this, reached over and placed his hand on Zuri's shoulder. His voice was wrecked, barely a whisper. "We know him, kid. We know your father. And he doesn't know you're alive." Zuri looked at these 5 men, strangers, warriors, men who had never met her, weeping because of a name she'd spoken. For 14 years, nobody had reacted to her existence with anything more than paperwork. And now 5 grown men were falling apart in a living room because she was alive. She whispered, "He doesn't know about me?" "Kwame, they told him you were dead, Zuri. They told your father you were dead." Something broke in that room. Not Zuri's walls, not yet. Those would take longer. But something shifted behind her eyes. The realization that she wasn't unwanted. She was hidden. There is a difference, a vast, world-altering difference between being abandoned and being stolen. Shep stood. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. The grief drained from his eyes. What replaced it was something every enemy they'd ever faced had learned to fear. Purpose. He looked at the other 4. His voice was steady now. Iron. 48 hours. We tell Gideon. We get a lawyer. We get DNA. And God help anyone who gets in the way. But 48 hours was also how long Vivian Hale Prescott had. And she had already started making calls. Because the dead girl was no longer a secret. And the grave Vivian dug 14 years ago was crumbling from the inside. Gideon Hale's house sat on 3 acres of waterfront property on the Chesapeake Bay. 6 bedrooms, a private dock, a view that stretched to the horizon. It was the kind of home that appeared in magazines, and it was completely empty. Not empty of furniture, empty of life. Gideon had lived alone since his divorce 5 years ago, a marriage Vivian had arranged to a woman from the right family, the right background, the right color. It lasted 7 years. It produced no children. It ended when Gideon's wife told him she couldn't compete with a ghost. She meant Lori. She was right. Shep Calloway and Kwame Asante pulled into the driveway at 6:14 in the morning. They had debated all night about who should tell him. Shep insisted it had to be him. He was the oldest. He had held Gideon through the worst of it. He had earned the right to deliver this. Gideon opened the door in a gray t-shirt and sweatpants. His eyes were tired, the eyes of a man who hadn't slept well in 14 years. He looked at Shep. He looked at Kwame. He read their faces the way operators read a room, fast, instinctive, looking for the threat. "Who died?" he said. Shep held his gaze. "No one died, Gideon. Someone's alive." They sat at his kitchen table. The bay was visible through the window. Flat, gray, indifferent. Shep laid everything out. The challenge coin, the photograph, the birthmark, the birth certificate with Gideon's name on it, Eula's testimony, Vivian's involvement, Judge Merriweather, the sealed records, the fake death report, 14 years of manufactured grief. Kwame watched Gideon's face as Shep talked. He expected rage. He expected tears. He expected the table to go over. None of that happened. Gideon went still. The kind of still that Kwame had only seen once before, in a sniper's nest in Kandahar, the half second before Gideon pulled the trigger. Complete shutdown of everything except the one thing that mattered. When Shep finished, Gideon sat in silence for 11 seconds. Kwame counted. Then he said one word. Where? Not a question, a demand. Where is my daughter? Shep told him. Norfolk, a group foster home on Granby Street, 14 years old, alive, healthy, brilliant, angry, scared, and about to be transferred to Roanoke in less than 48 hours if they didn't act. Gideon stood up from the table. He walked to the window. He placed both palms flat on the glass and stared at the bay. His shoulders didn't shake. His voice didn't crack. But when he spoke, every word was a blade. My sister told me my daughter was dead. She looked me in the face. She held my hand at the memorial. She told me God had a plan. He turned around. His eyes were dry, burning. Get me a lawyer. Get me a DNA test. And get me in front of a judge before that transfer goes through. This is what people don't understand about men like Gideon Hale. The grief didn't disappear when the truth arrived. It transformed. 14 years of sorrow became 14 years of fuel. And a man who had spent his life running toward danger had just been given the most important mission of his life. But Vivian was already moving. She learned that Gideon knew within 3 hours. Her source inside Hale Maritime, a board member loyal to her, reported that Gideon had canceled all meetings and called his personal attorney. Vivian recognized the pattern. She had watched her brother operate for decades. When Gideon went quiet, it meant he was about to strike. So she struck first. She called an emergency meeting of the Hale Family Trust Board. She presented a motion to declare Gideon mentally unfit, citing his documented history of depression, alcohol dependency, and a psychiatric evaluation from 2019. She moved to remove him as CEO and freeze his personal assets. 4 of the 7 board members were allies she had cultivated for years. The motion passed provisionally, pending a formal review. She then contacted Judge Merriweather. His instructions were simple. File an order to permanently seal Zuri's records and dismiss any pending motions related to the case. Make it disappear. Again. Vivian told her personal attorney, "That child will not inherit 1 cent. I don't care what it takes." But Vivian had miscalculated. She had prepared for lawyers. She had prepared for money. She had not prepared for a journalist. Darcy Whitaker was 36, biracial, an investigative reporter for the Virginia Pilot who had spent the last 18 months working a story that nobody wanted her to publish. The story was simple. Norfolk's family court system was broken. Black and brown families were losing their children at disproportionate rates, and at the center of the pattern was one name, Judge Colton Merriweather. Darcy had interviews. She had data. What she didn't have was a smoking gun. Until a courthouse source slipped her a filing, an emergency motion to unseal adoption records involving a minor named Banks, connected to a family named Hale. Darcy recognized the Hale name immediately. Everyone in Virginia Beach knew Hale Maritime. She started pulling threads, and the threads pulled back. Within 72 hours, Darcy had obtained financial disclosures showing $1.7 million in payments over 14 years. The money flowed from a shell company called Prescott Holdings LLC, registered to Vivian's husband, to a personal account held by Judge Colton Merriweather. She had testimony from a former clerk in Merriweather's office who confirmed that the judge received regular envelopes from a courier service linked to the Hale family. She had documentation of 4 other families, all black, whose children had been removed under Merriweather's orders with similarly thin justification. The story went live on a Tuesday morning. Headline: Billionaire's daughter hidden in foster care for 14 years, inside the Norfolk family court scandal. It detonated. Within 6 hours, the article had been shared 400,000 times. By evening, national outlets picked it up. The governor's office issued a statement calling for an immediate investigation. The Virginia State Bar opened a formal inquiry into Merriweather. Civil rights organizations demanded federal oversight. Legal analysts appeared on cable news dissecting the trust charter and the implications for the Hale fortune. But it was Eula's video that changed everything. Darcy had recorded an interview with Eula the day before publication. Eula sat in her living room, the same room where 5 SEALs had wept, and spoke directly into the camera. Her voice was calm, steady. The voice of a woman who had carried a secret for 14 years because she was terrified of what Vivian's power could do. She described Lori and Gideon together. She described holding baby Zuri in the hospital. She described the night they came, 2 men in suits, a court order she wasn't permitted to read, the baby pulled from her arms. That child screamed, Eula said. She screamed until I couldn't hear her anymore, and I have heard that sound every single night for 14 years. She paused. She looked into the camera. That child did not deserve what was done to her. Her mother did not deserve to die without knowing where her baby was. And that man, Gideon Hale, did not deserve to grieve a daughter who was alive. The video reached 12 million views in 48 hours. Eula's quiet dignity did more damage to Vivian's position than every legal brief combined. Meanwhile, Declan Reese connected with civil rights attorney Opal Jefferson. She filed an emergency motion to block Zuri's transfer and unseal the records. Merriweather, who should have recused himself, denied it within hours. But the media firestorm made his position untenable. He was placed on administrative leave the following morning. A new judge was assigned, Ariana Fontenot. She reviewed the case file overnight. She granted the emergency hold on Zuri's transfer. She ordered DNA testing between Gideon and Zuri, and she scheduled a hearing for the following week, the hearing that would decide everything. Gideon Hale would be in that courtroom. So would Zuri Banks, father and daughter, in the same room for the first time in 14 years. 20 feet of courtroom aisle between them. But Vivian's lawyers were already filing motions to block the DNA evidence, challenge Eula's credibility, and question the birth certificate's authenticity. She had spent 14 years building walls around this secret. She was not going to let them fall without a fight. The question was no longer whether the truth would come out. It was whether the truth would come out in time, before the system swallowed Zuri Banks one final time. Norfolk Circuit Court, 9 in the morning. The gallery was packed before the doors opened. Judge Ariana Fontenot entered at 9:15, 54, black, former military JAG officer. She didn't tolerate theatrics or lies. She had read every page of this case file twice. Gideon sat in the front row, left side, dark suit, hands on his knees, eyes straight ahead. Behind him, Shep, Kwame, Declan, Gus, Jonas. 5 men who didn't need to speak. Their presence said everything. On the right side, Zuri sat between Opal Jefferson and Tanisha. She wore a dress Tanisha bought her the day before, the first new clothing she'd had in 2 years. Her braids were pulled back. The crescent birthmark was visible. She didn't look at Gideon, not yet. But she knew he was there the way you feel fire in a dark room before you see the flame. In the back row, Vivian sat with 3 attorneys, posture perfect, expression composed, a woman watching her empire crack while pretending it was a board meeting. Fontenot opened proceedings. She noted Merriweather's administrative leave and federal investigation. She denied the Hale Trust's motion to dismiss. Then she invited counsel. Opal called Eula first. Eula walked to the stand slowly, deliberately, as if each step cost something. She placed her hand on the Bible and told the truth for 40 minutes. She described Lori and Gideon, the birth, the night they took Zuri. When Vivian's attorney challenged her memory due to age, Eula turned to him. "Sir, I remember the sound of that baby screaming. I will remember it in my grave. Would you like me to describe it?" The attorney sat down. A forensic accountant presented $1.7 million in transfers from Prescott Holdings, LLC, to Merriweather's accounts over 14 years. Payments structured under $10,000 to avoid federal reporting. Classic laundering methodology. Merriweather's former clerk took the stand, nervous, voice shaking, but she confirmed everything. The envelopes, unsigned orders, sealed records processed without review. She presented a handwritten log of irregularities spanning 9 years. Each seal testified briefly. They confirmed service with Gideon, knowledge of his relationship with Lori, and the devastation when he was told his daughter died. Shep was last. Opal asked one question. Did Commander Hale believe his child was deceased? Shep looked at the judge, then at Gideon. I held that man at 3 in the morning in a combat zone while he sobbed. He believed his daughter was in the ground because the people he trusted most, his own family, told him it was true. Heavy silence filled the room. Not procedural silence, the silence of people absorbing something enormous. Vivian's attorney made his final argument. Family privacy, sealed record integrity, Vivian's concern for children's welfare. Fontenot let him finish. Then she opened the 2012 custody file and read it aloud. No evidence of neglect, no home study, no hearing, no legal representation for the mother, an emergency order signed ex parte by a judge receiving payments from the petitioner's family. She removed her glasses. She looked at Vivian's attorney. This court finds the emergency custody order of 2012 was obtained through fraud, corruption, and deliberate manipulation. The order is vacated. All sealed records are unsealed. Vivian stood. Her attorney grabbed her arm. She pulled free. You don't understand what's at stake. I protected this family. Everything I did was to protect this family. Fontenot looked at her for 3 seconds. You separated a father from his daughter. You allowed a child to grow up in poverty while her family lived in wealth. You are excused, Mrs. Prescott. Vivian's heels clicked across the marble. She did not look back. Fontenot opened the sealed DNA envelope. The room held its breath. The probability of paternity between Gideon Tobias Hale and the minor child Zuri Amala Banks is 99.9998%. She looked up. This court recognizes Gideon Tobias Hale as the biological father. Custody transfers from the state of Virginia to the biological father, effective immediately. The courtroom erupted. Opal held Zuri's shoulders. Tanisha pressed both hands over her mouth. The 5 seals stood in unison, not celebration, but witness. Gideon rose. He turned. For the first time, he looked directly at Zuri. She looked back. He walked across the aisle. Each step is harder than any mission. In combat, he knew what to do. Walking toward a daughter he'd never held, there was no training, no protocol, only the terrifying hope that she would let him close enough. He knelt in front of her, didn't reach, didn't hug. He said, Zuri, my name is Gideon. I'm your father, and I am so sorry I didn't come sooner. Zuri looked at his ear, the crescent mark. She looked at the coin in her hand, the coin that traveled through 14 years of foster homes to bring her here. You gave my mama this coin. Gideon's composure shattered. Tears. He nodded. I gave it to her the day you were born. I told her to keep it safe for you. One tear ran down Zuri's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. They told me nobody was coming, she whispered. Gideon said, I'm here. Behind him, Kwame knelt beside her, voice rough, broken, full. You belong to a whole lot of people, kid. Justice had been served inside that courtroom. But healing is not a verdict. Trust is not a ruling. And 14 stolen years cannot be returned by a judge's order. The real work, the harder work, was about to begin. In the weeks that followed, the dominoes fell fast. Judge Colton Merriweather was indicted on federal charges of fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. 23 families, most of them black, had their cases reopened. Children who had been lost inside the system began finding their way back to parents who never stopped looking. Vivian Hale Prescott was charged as a co-conspirator. She was stripped of her role as trustee of the Hale Family Trust. The trust was restructured by court order. Zuri Amala Banks was recognized as a legal heir. Darcy Whitaker's reporting won a National Journalism Award. Her investigation triggered a statewide audit of Virginia's family court system, the first in 30 years. Gideon established the Lorraine Banks Foundation, $100 million dedicated to foster care reform and legal aid for families separated by judicial corruption. He named it after the woman he loved, the woman the system erased, the woman whose coin found its way home. But here's the part of this story that matters most. It isn't the courtroom, it isn't the headlines, it isn't the money. It's what happened quietly, between two people, one step at a time. Zuri did not move into Gideon's waterfront estate. She wasn't ready. Trust doesn't arrive because a judge says so. Trust is built in small moments, the kind nobody films, nobody reports, nobody sees. Gideon rented a modest apartment 4 blocks from Tanisha's group home. He didn't ask Zuri to come to him. He went to her. Every single day. He sat with her while she did homework. He didn't try to help unless she asked. He listened when she talked about her mother, and he didn't look away when it hurt. He drove her to Eula's house every Sunday, and the three of them sat on the porch drinking coffee that was always a little too strong. He didn't try to buy her love. He didn't try to replace what was lost. He just showed up, again and again and again, until showing up became the one thing Zuri could count on. 3 months passed before she was ready to spend her first night at his apartment. She brought the photograph, the coin, and the birth certificate. She hung the photograph on the wall of her new room. It was the first time in her life she had put something permanent on a wall. Think about that. 14 years old, and she had never had a wall that belonged to her. The 5 seals became family, not by blood, by choice. Gus taught Zuri to cook Dominican rice and beans. Declan helped her with college prep coursework. Jonas took her sailing on the bay. Kwame, the man who picked up a coin in a waiting room and changed everything, became the person she called when she couldn't sleep. And Shep, the gruff master chief who never showed emotion. He spent 3 weeks in his garage carving a wooden box, sanded smooth, oiled dark. On the lid, he carved a crescent moon. He gave it to Zuri without ceremony. "For your mama's picture," he said. Then he walked away before she could see his face. 6 months later, a beach on the Chesapeake Bay, sunset turning the water copper and gold. Gideon and Zuri sat on the sand. She was leaning against his shoulder, something that had taken months of patience and silence and simply being there. Zuri reached up and touched the birthmark behind her father's ear. Then she touched her own. "Mama told Eula it was our family mark," she said. "Every Hale gets it." Gideon nodded. "My father had it, his father before him." Zuri was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When I have kids, they'll have it too." Gideon looked at her. "Yeah," he said, "they will." Some miracles arrive with trumpets, but the truest ones are quiet. A name spoken aloud in a small living room. A coin passed from one hand to another across 14 years. A mark on the skin that whispers, "You come from here. You come from us." Zuri Amala Banks Hale was told she belonged to nobody. But blood remembers what systems try to erase. And love, the patient, stubborn, unrelenting kind, love always finds its way home. Alright, real quick. Yeah, the story, that part's made up. But that feeling though, like being invisible, like people acting like you don't even matter, yeah, that's real. That's happening right now. So forget the whole, is this real or not? You know it is. I'm just wondering, If you found out your whole life was a lie, what would you even do? Drop it in the comments, share this, and yeah, subscribe. Stories like this, people need to hear them.